middle-aged rancher thought he'd be alone forever, until 4 Apache women begged for just one night. John Miller was a man of routine. Every morning, as the first pale light of dawn crept over the jagged mountains surrounding his ranch, he would rise, pull on his worn boots, and step out into the cool desert air. The world was quiet except for the occasional lowing of his cattle and the soft whisper of wind across the open plains. For decades, this quietness had been his companion, his shield, and sometimes his burden. At 58, John had lived most of his life alone. He had grown up on this very land, learning to ride horses before he could even walk steadily. His father had taught him to mend fences, handle cattle, and respect the unforgiving ways of the desert. When John was a young man, he had married a woman named Clara, full of laughter and dreams that seemed to shine brighter than the Arizona sun. But life, as it often does, had a cruel twist in store. Clara had fallen ill, and within a few short years, John found himself alone, holding memories that felt heavier with each passing day. The ranch had become more than a home. It was his life's work, the only thing he felt he could truly control. The land demanded patience and dedication, and John gave it all he had. He rose before sunrise, checked the fences, fed the animals, and worked until the sky turned the warm colors of sunset. Nights were long and quiet. The house was small but sturdy, filled with reminders of a life once shared. A faded photograph of Clara rested on the mantel, her smile forever frozen in time. John often caught himself talking to her in those moments, as if the years of silence could be softened by a few whispered words. Even though he had lived his whole adult life in solitude, John did not feel lonely in the ordinary sense. He had neighbors, friends he could call if needed, and the occasional visit to the town's small store or post office. Yet, he could not deny a certain emptiness, a silent longing that he could neither name nor fully understand. Some evenings, as he sat on the porch watching the stars stretch endlessly above the desert, he wondered if he would ever feel a connection again, someone to share the quiet mornings or the long, warm nights. His routine rarely changed, but it brought him a sense of peace. He had adapted to life alone, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of chores and the steady companionship of his animals. Daisy, his loyal border collie, was often at his side, her presence a small comfort that reminded him he was not entirely alone. The cows and horses, while not speaking words of comfort, relied on him, and in caring for them, he felt a purpose that dulled the ache of solitude. John's neighbors often remarked that he was strong and independent, sometimes too much so. They admired his dedication, but could not fathom the man beneath the rugged exterior. Few knew the depth of his thoughts, the quiet moments of reflection, or the way his eyes lingered on the horizon, imagining a life that could have been different. The solitude had shaped him, yes, but it had also built invisible walls around his heart, walls he had convinced himself were necessary to survive the world. One particular morning, John found himself walking along the edge of his property, inspecting the fence lines where the desert met the open plains. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue across the land, turning every cactus and rocky outcrop into a silhouette against the brightening sky. He carried his leather satchel with tools, wire, and a hammer, prepared for the day's work. The air smelled faintly of sagebrush and dust, a scent that had always been strangely comforting. As he worked, John thought about his life, reflecting on how much he had accomplished yet how little he had shared with others. The ranch thrived under his care, the cattle were healthy, and the buildings stood strong against the harsh desert weather. And yet, the quiet around him felt heavier on some days, a reminder of what he had lost and what he had never found. He had friends, yes, but none who understood the man behind the work-worn face and calloused hands. His days were often filled with the physical labor of ranch life, but it was the evenings that revealed the true solitude. After a long day in the sun, He would sit on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, and watch as the sky transformed from gold to deep shades of orange and red. The desert seemed to come alive at twilight. Coyotes would call in the distance, their haunting songs echoing across the plains. Occasionally, a hawk would glide silently overhead, returning to its nest before night fell. In these moments, John felt a strange kinship with the land, a shared solitude that was at once comforting and bittersweet. Despite the routine and his contentment with life on the ranch, John often wondered about connection. He thought about what it meant to be seen and known by another human being in the way Clara had once known him. There were nights when he would replay memories of laughter, conversation, and simple touches, feeling both warmth and an ache that could not be filled by work or animals alone. These reflections were never bitter. They were quiet reminders of a human heart still capable of longing. The town was small, and news traveled slowly, often via word of mouth or the occasional town bulletin. People respected John's privacy and rarely intruded on his life. Children waved as they passed by, neighbors exchanged greetings, and a few loyal friends would stop for visits. Yet there was always a distance, an invisible line that John had drawn between himself and the rest of the world. He preferred it that way, believing that solitude had kept him strong and safe. But deep inside, he sometimes felt that life had more to offer, if only he could find the courage to reach for it. The thought of companionship, of laughter, and shared experiences flickered occasionally in his mind like the stars that lit the desert night. He would catch himself imagining a life that was not so solitary, a life filled with conversation, warmth, and simple joys that had been missing for too long. On this particular morning, as he walked along the fence line, John noticed how still the desert was. The usual sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustle of small animals were subdued, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. He paused, leaning on his hammer, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He realized that while he had built walls to protect himself, life had a way of testing those walls, gently reminding him that solitude was not the same as isolation. Little did John know that the events of the coming days would challenge everything he had believed about his life. The desert, so familiar and predictable, was about to introduce an unexpected twist, a moment that would awaken feelings he had long thought dormant and show him that even the most solitary life could change in a single night. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the plains, John returned to his work, unaware that his quiet life was on the brink of a transformation. The ranch would continue to thrive, his routines would continue to guide his days, but soon he would encounter a situation that would test his beliefs, his emotions, and the carefully constructed walls around his heart. And in that moment, John would discover that life sometimes offers connections when they are least expected, and that even the most solitary of souls can find warmth, understanding, and companionship. For now, though, the ranch was quiet. The morning sun painted the land in gold, and John Miller went about his work, a man who had learned to find comfort in routine, yet whose heart still held the quiet hope of something more. John had finished repairing the broken fence near the northern edge of his ranch when he noticed something unusual. 4 figures appeared in the distance, moving cautiously across the desert. At first, he thought they might be travelers or perhaps lost hikers, but as they drew closer, he realized they were women. Their clothing was simple, worn from travel, and each carried a small bundle. Something in the way they moved, careful, alert, yet tired, made John pause. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and stepped closer, squinting against the bright sun. The women seemed to notice him at the same time, and they stopped abruptly, exchanging quiet words among themselves. There was no immediate threat, but the unfamiliarity of the situation made John tense. For decades, he had dealt only with the predictable elements of ranch life: animals, weather, neighbors, and the occasional stranger passing through town. But this was different. These were people in need, and he could see it in their eyes. He called out cautiously, "Hello there. Can I help you?" The women looked at each other and then back at him. One of them, who appeared to be the eldest, stepped forward slightly. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency. "Sir, we are traveling and we were caught in the storm last night. We need shelter just for one night." John studied them. Their clothes were damp from the morning dew, and the younger women looked exhausted, their faces marked by dust and weariness. Something in their request, simple yet desperate, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time, a mix of curiosity, empathy, and cautious concern. He took a deep breath and forced a calm tone. "You're welcome to rest here. My house isn't large, but it's warm, and you can have water, food, and a place to stay until the sun rises." Relief washed over the women's faces. They thanked him softly, in unison, and began to approach the ranch, careful not to disturb the cattle or the fences. John watched them move, noting how their tiredness contrasted with their quiet determination. There was a sense of trust, fragile but present, as they entered the yard, and John felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He led them to the small guest room at the back of the house, a space he rarely used. The room was simple, a few chairs, a bed, and clean linens, but it would serve their needs. As he helped them settle in, he noticed the subtle differences in their personalities. One was quiet and observant, taking in every corner of the room with keen eyes. Another seemed restless, constantly shifting and checking the window. The youngest appeared shy but smiled faintly whenever John spoke to her. And the eldest, who had spoken first, carried herself with a calm authority, guiding the others gently through the unfamiliar space. After they were settled, John returned to the kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast. Eggs, bread, and coffee were laid out on the table. The women joined him, their gratitude quiet but evident. Conversation was slow at first, cautious, each word measured. But as the morning passed, stories began to emerge. They spoke of traveling through the desert, of family left behind, and of dreams that had been postponed by circumstances beyond their control. John listened more than he spoke, feeling a strange connection growing with each passing moment. The day moved on, and John showed them around the ranch. He pointed out the cattle, the fields, and the tools he used daily. The women asked questions, genuinely interested in his life, and John found himself answering with more detail than he had ever shared with anyone. For hours they worked together. He repaired broken gates while they helped feed the animals and gather firewood. There was a rhythm to the work, a way in which shared effort created a subtle bond. By the afternoon, laughter had begun to fill the spaces of the house, and John felt a warmth he had long thought lost to time. As the sun climbed higher, one of the women suggested a small walk beyond the property line. John hesitated but agreed, sensing that the desert could offer them a sense of peace and freedom. They walked slowly, the conversation light and filled with curiosity. The youngest asked about the stars, wondering when they would be visible, and John explained how the desert sky was different from the city, how the stars seemed closer and more vivid here. The women listened, captivated, and John realized how much he enjoyed sharing knowledge, teaching something small but meaningful. Returning to the ranch as the afternoon began to wane, John noticed the sky darkening slightly, a rare cloud moving across the normally clear expanse. He decided to prepare dinner early, inviting the women to join him in the kitchen. As he cooked, the smells of simmering stew and freshly baked bread filled the air, and the women helped in small ways, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, setting the table. The house, which had once felt empty and silent, now hummed with energy and warmth. Dinner was quiet at first, with everyone unsure of what to say, but eventually the conversation deepened. The women spoke of challenges they had faced, of the determination it took to keep moving forward when life seemed unfair. John shared stories of the ranch, of Clara, and of the years spent in solitude. He found himself laughing more than he had in years, the sound mingling with theirs in a way that felt natural and comforting. For the first time in decades, he felt that the walls around his heart had softened, even if just slightly. As night approached, John lit a small fire outside. The women gathered around, wrapped in blankets against the cool desert air. The stars appeared, glittering across the sky like tiny diamonds scattered by some unseen hand. They sat together, sharing stories, dreams, and quiet observations about the world around them. John noticed how each woman had a different energy, one practical, one reflective, one playful, and one calm yet firm. They complemented each other in a way that was almost magical, and he felt privileged to witness it. The eldest woman spoke softly, her voice carrying across the desert. "We are grateful for your kindness, John. It is rare to meet someone who offers help without asking for anything in return." John shook his head slightly, feeling the truth of her words. "I've lived here a long time," he said. "I know what it's like to need help, even if you don't ask for it. The desert teaches you that kindness matters." The night grew deeper and the air became cooler. The women decided to rest in the guest room, leaving John by the fire, watching the flames dance. He reflected on the day, on the unexpected encounter, and on the way it had stirred feelings he had not allowed himself to feel in years. There was a sense of connection, fragile yet undeniable, that made him reconsider his solitary life. He realized that life, no matter how routine or predictable, could surprise him. The arrival of these women had shifted the balance of his world, introducing warmth, laughter, and companionship into a life that had long been defined by solitude. For John, the day had been a reminder that even in the most isolated corners of the world, human connection could appear unexpectedly, offering a glimpse of hope, understanding, and shared experience. Before retiring to his own room, John checked on the women once more. They were asleep, tired but safe, and he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. In a single day, the ranch had transformed from a place of routine and silence into a home filled with life, stories, and human warmth. And as he lay in bed that night, listening to the faint sounds of the desert, the wind rustling through the cacti, the occasional cry of a distant owl, he knew that his life had changed, even if he did not yet fully understand how. The encounter had begun with a simple request for shelter, a need born of circumstance, yet it had become something far greater. It was a moment of trust, of openness, and of connection that reminded John of the world beyond his ranch and the possibilities that life still held. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement for what might come next, and an awareness that sometimes the most meaningful experiences arrive when they are least expected. And so, John Miller went to sleep that night with a heart slightly lighter, a mind buzzing with thoughts, and a spirit quietly awakened. The desert remained vast and silent outside, but inside, the ranch held warmth, laughter, and a promise that life, even after years of solitude, could still surprise a man who had learned to survive alone. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, spilling warm gold across the ranch. John woke earlier than usual, as he always did, but today his mind was restless. The events of the previous day still lingered in his thoughts. The women were still asleep in the guest room, their quiet breathing a soft rhythm in the otherwise silent house. John moved about carefully, trying not to disturb them, and began preparing breakfast. He made coffee and toasted bread, his hands moving on autopilot, yet his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the women, their bravery, their kindness, and the way they had entered his life so suddenly. The eldest woman's calm presence had lingered in his thoughts, while the younger one's curiosity and energy had reminded him of a world beyond his ranch. He had spent so many years alone that he almost forgot what it felt like to share simple moments with others. Eventually, the women stirred. The eldest rose first, stretching slowly, and then helped the others awaken. There was no rush, no pressure, just the natural rhythm of a quiet morning. John called them to breakfast and they joined him at the table. Conversation was gentle, filled with observations about the sky, the animals, and the life of the ranch. John shared stories of Clara, of the early years on the land, and of how the ranch had grown under his care. The women listened attentively, asking questions and offering thoughtful comments, their presence making him feel unusually seen and understood. After breakfast, John suggested they take a walk to see the far side of the property. The women agreed eagerly, and they set off together, moving slowly across the desert landscape. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and earth. As they walked, John noticed the quiet way the women observed the land, taking in every detail: the rocky outcrops, the scattered cacti, the traces of animals in the dust. There was a sense of wonder in their eyes, as if they were seeing the desert for the first time, and it reminded John of how he himself had once felt, years ago, when the land had seemed full of endless possibilities. They reached a small rise that overlooked the ranch. From there, John could see the entirety of his property: the sprawling fields, the fences stretching into the distance, the cattle grazing calmly, and the house nestled quietly in the middle. The view always reminded him of the years of hard work he had poured into this land. But today, with the women beside him, the landscape felt different, alive with possibility, a symbol of shared experience rather than solitude. The eldest woman spoke softly, her eyes on the horizon. "This is beautiful," she said. "It is more than land. It feels alive." John nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "It is alive," he agreed. "It has to be taken care of, watched over. It gives back only as much as you give it." The women smiled and the moment passed quietly, but John noticed a change within himself. He was no longer merely observing them as strangers in need. He was seeing them as individuals with their own stories, challenges, and strengths. Their presence stirred emotions he had long buried: empathy, curiosity, and a quiet sense of companionship. Later, as they returned to the ranch, the sky darkened slightly with gathering clouds. A gentle wind began to blow, carrying the promise of a brief desert storm. John suggested that they spend the afternoon inside, helping with household chores. The women agreed, and together they tidied the house, washed dishes, and prepared food for the evening. There was laughter and lightness in the air, a contrast to the quiet solitude that had defined John's life for so many years. By mid-afternoon, the storm arrived, a sudden, brief downpour that drenched the desert and sent clouds scuttling across the sky. John watched the rain from the porch, feeling a mixture of awe and respect for the desert's unpredictability. The women joined him, wrapped in blankets, watching the storm in silence. There was no need for words. The shared experience was enough. It was a moment of connection, of understanding, of human presence that filled the space between them without requiring explanation. As the rain eased, the women began sharing more of their personal stories. One spoke of her family, who lived far to the north, and the sacrifices she had made to travel safely with her companions. Another described the challenges of navigating the desert, the fear, and the resilience required to continue despite uncertainty. Each story was delivered with honesty and grace, and John listened intently, feeling admiration and a growing sense of kinship. In return, John shared his own experiences, not just of ranch life, but of loss, solitude, and the quiet lessons he had learned over the years. He spoke of Clara, of the early days filled with love and laughter, and of the emptiness that followed her passing. The women listened with empathy, their reactions gentle and understanding, allowing him to speak freely without judgment. For the first time in decades, John felt a sense of emotional safety, a rare opportunity to express feelings he had long suppressed. Evening approached, and John suggested a small dinner outdoors, near the fire pit. The women agreed, and together they prepared the meal. John chopped vegetables and stirred stew, while the women helped set the table and arrange blankets near the fire. The act of working together created a rhythm, a sense of community that John had rarely experienced. There was a warmth to the evening that went beyond the physical fire, a warmth born from shared effort, conversation, and mutual respect. As night fell, the fire crackled, sending sparks into the cool desert air. The stars emerged, brilliant and countless, stretching across the sky in a way that made the world feel vast and timeless. The women sat around the fire, speaking softly of dreams, hopes, and the simple joys they had found along their journey. John joined them, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for their presence and the unexpected richness they had brought into his life. The eldest woman turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. "You have been very kind to us, John. It is rare to find someone who offers help without expecting anything in return." John smiled faintly, the words touching something deep within him. "I've lived here a long time," he replied. "I know the value of kindness. It is sometimes the only thing that keeps people going." As the night deepened, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, memories from childhood, small adventures, and amusing anecdotes from the road. Laughter filled the space, a sound that John realized he had almost forgotten. It was a moment of pure human connection, simple and unpretentious, yet profoundly moving. He felt a sense of belonging he had never known in his solitary years, a recognition that life could offer companionship even in the most unlikely circumstances. Eventually, the women decided to rest for the night, returning to the guest room. John stayed by the fire a little longer, letting the quiet and the warmth settle over him. He reflected on the day, realizing that a single encounter could shift the rhythm of one's life, awaken emotions long dormant, and offer glimpses of possibilities previously unseen. In the quiet of the desert night, John understood that this day had marked a turning point. He had opened his home, shared his life, and allowed strangers into his world, and in doing so, he had discovered a part of himself he thought lost. The walls around his heart, carefully constructed over decades of solitude, had softened. He felt a quiet sense of hope, a feeling that life, despite its hardships, could still surprise him in meaningful ways. As he finally went to bed, John felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, curiosity, and a gentle anticipation for what might come next. The ranch, once silent and routine, now seemed alive with possibility. The presence of the women had reminded him that even the most solitary lives could be touched by connection, that human kindness and understanding could appear when least expected, and that moments of shared experience could awaken feelings that had long been dormant. And so, John Miller drifted into sleep with a heart quietly stirred, a mind open to the unknown, and a spirit aware that life could offer unexpected joys. The desert outside remained vast and silent, but inside, the ranch held warmth, companionship, and the promise of change, a change that would continue to unfold in the days to come. The morning after the storm, the desert was quiet and refreshed. The air carried the earthy scent of wet soil and sagebrush, a fragrance that John had always loved but rarely experienced after the long, dry months. The ranch looked different in the soft morning light, as though the brief rain had awakened it from its usual routine. Birds chirped from the trees near the house, and the cattle moved slowly, as if savoring the cooler air. For John, the morning was filled with a sense of calm, but also an underlying tension. The women had stayed the night, and while their presence was comforting, it also reminded him that life was changing, and change, however gentle, could be unsettling. Breakfast was quiet at first, the women still tired from the day before. John prepared scrambled eggs and fresh bread, offering coffee and juice. The eldest woman thanked him quietly, her words sincere, and the others nodded, showing their appreciation in small gestures. As they ate, John noticed subtle shifts in their behavior. They seemed more comfortable, less reserved, and more willing to share their thoughts. He realized that trust was growing, slowly but surely, and it made him feel both honored and responsible. After breakfast, John suggested they help him with some of the ranch work. He knew that labor could be grounding, a way to connect with the land and with each other. The women agreed eagerly, and together they moved to the fields. John handed them small tasks, feeding chickens, checking fences, and gathering firewood. Their energy and willingness to help impressed him. The youngest woman, especially, had a way of learning quickly, her movements careful but confident. Watching her reminded John of the days when Clara had been beside him, her curiosity and laughter filling the space with warmth. As they worked, conversation flowed naturally. They spoke of their travels, of towns and landscapes they had seen, and of the people they had met along the way. John shared stories of the ranch, of the animals, and of the many seasons he had experienced. He found himself laughing more easily than he had in years, the sound mingling with the women's voices in a way that felt comforting and alive. The desert, which had once seemed vast and lonely, now seemed intimate, as if it had opened its arms to welcome them all. By late morning, clouds began to gather again, hinting at another brief rain. John suggested they take a break inside where it was cooler and dry. The women agreed, and they gathered in the kitchen for tea. Conversation turned deeper, touching on hopes, regrets, and the lessons life had taught them. One of the women spoke about the importance of resilience, sharing a story of a time when she had faced great uncertainty and had learned to keep moving forward despite fear. John listened carefully, inspired by her courage and wisdom. He felt a growing admiration for the women, not just for their strength, but for the way they carried themselves with dignity and kindness. As the day progressed, John realized how much the women had brought into his life in just a short time. Their presence had reminded him of the beauty of human connection, of the warmth that comes from shared work and conversation, and of the quiet joy of being needed and appreciated. It was a stark contrast to the solitude he had grown accustomed to, and he found himself reflecting on the walls he had built around his heart. For decades, he had told himself that he was content alone, that the ranch and the animals were enough. But now, in the presence of these strangers, he saw how incomplete that life had been. Lunch was a simple affair, but it was filled with laughter and camaraderie. John cooked over the stove while the women helped set the table and clear dishes. They joked about small mistakes, shared little stories from their travels, and even teased John gently about his serious nature. The house was alive with the sound of voices, and John felt a warmth spreading through him, a feeling he had almost forgotten existed. For the first time in years, he felt fully present, fully engaged, and fully alive. After lunch, the women expressed a desire to explore the surrounding area. John hesitated at first, worried about their safety, but eventually agreed. They walked together along the trails, noticing the small details of the desert, the patterns in the sand, the shapes of rocks, and the tracks of animals. Each observation sparked conversation, and John found himself seeing the land through fresh eyes. The women's curiosity reminded him that life could be full of wonder, even in places he thought he knew intimately. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, the women returned to the ranch. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the air was filled with the soft hum of evening insects. John suggested they prepare dinner outside, near the fire pit, and the women agreed enthusiastically. Together they chopped vegetables, stirred stew, and arranged blankets near the fire. The act of working together created a rhythm, a shared purpose that strengthened the bond between them. Dinner was peaceful and joyful. Conversation flowed easily, touching on past experiences, future hopes, and small, everyday observations. John shared stories from his youth, tales of adventures with Clara, and moments of quiet reflection on the life he had lived alone. The women listened intently, offering insights and empathy, their presence a gentle reminder of the richness of human connection. Laughter punctuated the evening, mingling with the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of the desert night. After dinner, they sat together, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. The eldest woman spoke softly about the importance of kindness and the power of small gestures to change lives. John felt a deep sense of gratitude for their words, realizing that the simple act of sharing time, effort, and conversation had already transformed his life. The women had brought warmth, laughter, and companionship into a space that had once been defined by solitude, and he knew that their visit would leave a lasting mark on him. As the night deepened, the women returned to the guest room to rest. John stayed by the fire for a while longer, reflecting on the day's events. He realized that their presence had challenged many of his long-held beliefs. He had always told himself that solitude was sufficient, that emotional distance protected him from pain. Yet now he saw that connection and vulnerability could bring joy, growth, and a sense of belonging that he had long been missing. The experience also made him aware of his own capacity for kindness and empathy. By opening his home and offering shelter, he had created a space where trust and mutual respect could flourish. The women's gratitude and openness reminded him that small acts of generosity could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he might never fully understand. For John, it was a lesson in humility and the power of human connection, a lesson he knew would stay with him long after the women had gone. In the quiet moments before sleep, John thought about the future. He wondered how the women's visit would continue to influence his life. Would he seek out more connections, or retreat once again into routine? He did not yet know the answer, but he felt a sense of anticipation and hope. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to imagine a life that was not defined solely by solitude, a life that could include friendship, laughter, and shared experiences. As he lay in bed, listening to the faint sounds of the desert, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the soft whisper of wind, John felt a quiet contentment. The ranch, the land he had devoted his life to, remained a constant, but now it was a backdrop for something more. The women's visit had introduced a new rhythm to his life, one that included connection, empathy, and the gentle warmth of companionship. He closed his eyes with a heart both full and light. The experience had been brief, yet transformative. The women had come seeking shelter, and in doing so, they had offered him a gift far greater than he could have imagined. They had reminded him that life, even after years of routine and solitude, could still surprise, inspire, and awaken emotions long dormant. And as sleep finally claimed him, John knew that he was no longer the same man who had risen with the dawn hours ago. The day had brought challenges, reflection, laughter, and a deep sense of connection. It had reminded him of the value of human kindness, the importance of trust, and the beauty of shared experience. He drifted into dreams with a spirit quietly renewed, aware that life, even in its simplest moments, could be profound, meaningful, and unexpectedly joyful. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting soft golden light across the fields. John Miller woke feeling a mixture of anticipation and quiet reflection. The previous days had been unlike anything he had experienced in decades. The women had shared his life, his home, and his heart in small, meaningful ways, and now the time had come for them to continue their journey. He knew this moment would leave him feeling both grateful and wistful, but he also sensed that he had changed in ways that would remain with him forever. The women gathered their belongings, each carrying their small bundles carefully. The eldest woman smiled at John, her expression gentle but firm. "Thank you, John," she said softly. "Your kindness has meant more to us than words can express. We will carry it with us." John nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He struggled for a moment to find the right words. "You've all brought something into my life that I didn't know I was missing," he said finally. "I hope your journey is safe and that you continue to find courage, joy, and friendship wherever you go." The younger women each embraced him briefly, shy but sincere. Their warmth lingered in the room, filling it with a quiet sense of closure and new beginnings. John watched as they left, their figures moving steadily across the ranch toward the distant road. He remained on the porch, feeling the desert wind on his face, the familiar scent of sagebrush around him, and the profound realization that life had offered him a gift that could not be measured. After the women had disappeared from sight, John returned to the house and began his usual morning chores. The work felt different now, lighter, more meaningful, infused with a sense of purpose and connection. He fed the cattle, repaired the fences, and tended to the fields with renewed energy, aware that his life had shifted in subtle but lasting ways. The ranch, once a place of routine and solitude, now felt alive with possibility and memory. As the day went on, John reflected on the lessons he had learned from the women. He thought about the courage it took to ask for help, the humility required to accept it, and the joy that comes from genuine human connection. He realized that life, no matter how long it had been lived in solitude, could still offer moments of profound beauty, unexpected friendship, and emotional growth. These insights filled him with a quiet sense of gratitude and hope. By mid-morning, he decided to visit the town, a rare excursion for someone who had grown so accustomed to life on the ranch. As he walked through the streets, he noticed familiar faces greeting him warmly. But today, he felt a difference in himself, a readiness to engage, to share stories, and to accept the company of others. He spoke with the store owner about supplies, exchanged pleasantries with neighbors, and even laughed at a small joke told by a local child. The world felt less distant and more welcoming, and John realized that the women's visit had rekindled a part of him that had been dormant for too long. Returning to the ranch in the afternoon, John began to make small changes. He cleaned the guest room thoroughly, arranging the space with care, a silent acknowledgement that the room could be ready again for unexpected visitors. He repaired fences more attentively, tended to the fields with thoughtfulness, and even found himself speaking softly to Daisy, his loyal dog, as if sharing the happiness that had filled his heart. The ranch felt less like a solitary refuge and more like a home open to possibility and connection. As evening approached, John prepared a simple meal, thinking about the women and the lessons they had imparted. He ate slowly, savoring the food and the memories of the past few days. He remembered the laughter around the fire, the quiet conversations under the stars, and the way the women had shared their lives with him so openly. Their presence had reminded him that kindness, empathy, and trust could create bonds that endure far beyond a single encounter. After dinner, he stepped outside and walked to the edge of the property, where he could see the horizon stretching endlessly. The desert was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. John felt a deep sense of peace, a recognition that while life could be unpredictable, it could also be profoundly rewarding. He understood now that solitude was not the absence of connection, but rather a space in which connection could be recognized and cherished when it appeared. Over the next few weeks, John's life continued, but the rhythm had changed. He found himself more open to conversation with neighbors, more willing to accept help, and more inclined to offer it. Small interactions that once seemed insignificant now carried meaning. He shared stories with visitors, offered guidance to younger ranchers, and even began organizing small gatherings for those in the community. The warmth and companionship he had experienced with the women had ignited a desire to cultivate connection and understanding in every aspect of his life. One afternoon, as he worked in the fields, he noticed a family walking nearby. The children waved, and John waved back, a smile spreading across his face. He realized that his world, once confined to the boundaries of his ranch, had expanded. The experience with the 4 women had opened his heart, allowing him to see the value of relationships, the importance of empathy, and the beauty of shared moments. Life, he understood, was not meant to be lived in isolation, but in connection with others, even in the smallest ways. Nights at the ranch also took on new meaning. John would sit by the fire, thinking of the stars above and the desert below, remembering the stories shared, the laughter, and the quiet moments of understanding. He found comfort in reflection, recognizing that while the women had left, their impact remained. Their visit had transformed his perspective, taught him to embrace vulnerability, and shown him that life could hold unexpected joys at any stage. In the months that followed, John began to reach out more. He invited neighbors over for small dinners, shared stories of his life on the ranch, and even took time to mentor younger people interested in learning the ways of ranching. Each interaction, no matter how brief, reminded him of the lessons the women had taught him, the power of trust, the value of kindness, and the enduring strength found in connection. John also found time for personal reflection. He spent quiet moments in the early mornings, watching the sunrise and evenings under the stars. He thought about Clara, the woman he had lost so many years ago, and realized that while the past shaped him, it did not have to define his present or future. He felt gratitude for the memories, for the land, and for the people who had touched his life, and he allowed himself to hope for continued growth, joy, and companionship. One evening, as he sat by the fire, Daisy resting at his feet, John smiled to himself. The ranch had always been his life, but now it was also a place of opportunity, of connection, and of possibility. The brief visit of 4 women had reminded him that life could surprise even the most solitary souls, that kindness could ripple outward in unexpected ways, and that human connection, however fleeting, could leave a lasting imprint on the heart. John understood more than ever that life is not measured solely by work or solitude, but by the moments of genuine connection, empathy, and shared experience. The women had come seeking shelter, but in doing so, they had given him something far greater, a renewed sense of purpose, the courage to open his heart, and the awareness that even in the quietest corners of life, warmth and companionship could be found. In the quiet of that night, John felt a profound sense of completion. His days on the ranch would continue, the work would remain demanding, and the desert would always hold its challenges. But he now approached life with a heart open to possibility, a mind ready for connection, and a spirit awakened to the beauty of human kindness. He understood that the lessons of the past few days were not fleeting. They would guide him for the rest of his life, shaping the way he viewed the world, the people around him, and the very land he had called home for so many years. And so John Miller lived on, no longer merely a solitary rancher, but a man transformed by compassion, shared experience, and the gentle reminder that life, in its quietest moments, holds the power to surprise, inspire, and bring people together. The desert remained vast and silent, but within it, John had discovered a space where friendship, warmth, and hope could flourish. His heart, once guarded and solitary, now carried the echoes of laughter, trust, and the unforgettable presence of those who had briefly touched his life, leaving him forever changed, yet deeply at peace.